Hi everyone, welcome to my channel Bibbidi Bobbidi Books. My name is Ellie and this is going to be a wrap-up video. So today I'm going to be wrapping up some of the books that I've read over the last few months, and it's been a while since I filmed a wrap-up video just because I haven't read that many books this year. I have very much taken a slower reading pace and I've been really enjoying it actually. I feel like there is quite a lot of pressure, especially when you have a book channel, to read loads of books so that you've got loads of content for your YouTube channel. And I've actually taken a big step back and I have slowed my reading pace right down, and it's actually been really lovely. It's been nice to concentrate on one book at a time and to feel fully invested in each story before moving on to the next. So yeah, I've been enjoying reading things slowly, and yeah, today I thought I would catch you up on some of the books that I've read. So the first book that I want to discuss with you today is Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb. Now I did film a dedicated reading review for this book, but the audio quality was really bad in that video, so I'm really sorry. But yes, this is the first book in the Live Ship Traders trilogy, which is the second series in the overarching realm of the Elderlings series by Robin Hobb. And this one feels quite different to the first series. So if you don't know, the first series is the Farseer series, and it has a first-person narration style and you're following the perspective of the main character Fitz. Whereas in this series, we are following a whole cast of characters. So it's multi-POV and has third-person narration. And it's really refreshing actually, and I really enjoyed getting to know the different characters in this book. And my goodness, are there a range of characters to get to know in this story. But firstly, what is this about? So this book takes place in an area called the Cursed Shores. So it is a coastal region. It's in the same universe as the first series, but in a slightly different setting. So it has a nautical fantasy style to it. And we're following families and individuals who are all involved in sea life in some way. So we're following merchants and traders and pirates, those kinds of things. And the main family that we are following are the Vestrits, who are an old trader family, and they have a live ship. So in this world, the magic revolves around wizard wood, which can be crafted into ships. And the magical element of it is that these ships can become sentient. They can gain consciousness and basically become alive if 3 consecutive generations of the same family die on board the ship's decks. So that's how these live ships are created. And this first book opens with a live ship quickening, so coming alive. And we're basically following the aftermath of this event and how it affects the family. So there's a lot of family politics and drama that surrounds this big event. And we watch kind of what happens really, and we follow along with the live ship as she sets out on her first voyage with a new captain. So that's the main storyline, but we also follow the perspective of a pirate called Kenneth who wants to become Pirate King, and he thinks the best way to do that is by commandeering a live ship for himself. I really enjoyed this first book in this new series, and I feel like this series is going to become a new favourite. I think Robin Hobb is quickly becoming a favourite author of mine. She definitely writes in a way that is very theme and character led, which is exactly my reading taste. I'm much more of a theme led reader. I like to sink my teeth into some interesting discussion, and I also really enjoy complex and messy characters, and that is definitely what you get in this story. So in terms of themes, I think for me, the main themes in here revolve around autonomy. So there's definitely this idea of what is it like, or what does it mean to be an individual with your own mind? So someone who is alive and, you know, thinking, is sentient. What does it mean to be someone like that, but to also be controlled by others? So that could be in the form of a live ship who is literally alive, but they're also a ship that is being, you know, used by a captain. They are an object that is owned. But you also have characters like, you know, literal slaves who are being bought and sold for profit. You have, you know, younger adults and children who are being controlled by their parents. And you have women who are being manipulated by their abusive husbands. So there's definitely a lot to discuss around autonomy and what it means when you have your control taken away from you and you're not able to make decisions for yourself, all of those kinds of things. And it's really really interesting. We also have some great characters. They're all complex and messy and not necessarily likable. In fact, there's two characters, Kenneth and Kyle, who are truly despicable, and I've never felt so viscerally about characters in a book before. I truly hated those two characters, and honestly I found some of their chapters slightly triggering to read just because I would get so worked up just being in their head because they're so misogynistic, so manipulative, truly awful characters. But at the same time, you can't look away, and it's weirdly fascinating being inside their head and seeing things through their perspective. And what I really appreciate about this book is how Robin Hobb, has some characters who may have good intentions, but they're going about things in completely the wrong way, or vice versa. She might have characters that have really terrible intentions, but from an outside perspective, it looks like they're doing good things. And that just is so interesting. And I loved that. I loved the fact that we got to see inside the minds of different characters. And then we also got to see those characters from other people's perspectives. So they might have a different opinion of the person. They might be viewing that person's actions in a certain way, but we know how the characters actually feel inside their own minds. Honestly, it was so interesting and a fascinating read. My favourite character by a long shot was Wintro. I thought his perspective was fascinating. Wintro was he was brought up as a priest, but he ends up getting pulled away from the priesthood against his will, and we watch his journey, and it's difficult to talk about without spoilers, but he is so divided, and that makes him such an interesting character. And we watch as, he is put in situations where he's forced to act against his morals. He's forced to do things that he doesn't necessarily want to do. He's forced to behave in a way that doesn't sit right with him. And he's forced to make really difficult decisions. And it's just absolutely fascinating to watch. And my goodness, does he go through a lot in this first book. And that's definitely something that I want to flag about this story. This is not a light read. It is heavy. There are some difficult subjects that are discussed in this book, primarily slavery, but there's also a lot of violence, a lot of misogyny, and all sorts of other things that could be potential triggers. So please do look up warnings before you go into this one if you need to, and also just be mindful of your own sort of headspace before you go into a story like this, because it is pretty heavy. And there were times where I, struggled to get through it because it can be quite depressing at times, but it is also just such a great story. It's set on the seas a lot of the time. We've got some great aesthetics of what it's like to live on a ship. We've got, sea serpents. It's exciting as well. Although I do feel like you need to recognise that Robin Hobb is more of a slower writer. So she is really establishing each character in this first book, and she takes her time with it, which I do appreciate because I feel like it has a big payoff when you get to know characters on such an intimate level. But yeah, it is, she does have a slower type of writing style, but I personally wasn't bored at any time whilst reading this story, and I'm so excited to continue on and to see what happens next. Okay, so next up we have The Honey Witch by Sydney S. Shields, and my goodness, was I frustrated by this book. So I actually listened to this book on audio, and I read the first part because it's in several sections. I read part one on audio, and I really, really loved the story. There were so many quotes that really grabbed me, and I just thought it was so beautifully written, and I was really invested. So I decided to go out and buy the actual hard copy so that I could annotate it. And I'm really sad that I did, because after part one, it all went downhill for me. And I think that's in part my fault, because I didn't read too much into this one. I just saw that it looked cute, and I heard that it was a cottagecore style fantasy, and I fancied something cozy, so I decided to pick it up. I didn't realize it was heavy on the romance. It has a sapphic romance in there, and it is is very heavy on the romance plot after you get past part 1, and it just wasn't doing it for me, which is a shame. But anyway, what is this story? So like I said, it's pitched as a cozy cottagecore style fantasy, and we're following our main character, who is a honey witch. So she decides to abandon the life that she is leading. So she's basically expected to marry and to settle down, but she doesn't want that for herself, and so she decides to run away with her grandmother, who was also a honey witch, and she decides to learn her craft and to learn magic, but it comes at a price because no one can love a honey witch. So she has to give up this idea of love if she wants to train to be a witch, which she does. And the first chapter is very whimsical. She runs away with her grandmother. She's learning magic and how you make magic out of honey and flowers. And there's lots of descriptions of, you know, being in the meadow and the beauty of nature, and she's helping people, and she has this really beautiful relationship with her grandmother, and I really enjoyed it. And there was also lots of fantastic feminist quotes, which I'd like to read you actually, so you get an idea of the writing style. So a couple of quotes that I really liked. There's one that says, "These are the wild women who run barefoot through the meadow, who teach new songs to the birds, who howl at the moon together. Wild women are their own kind of magic." And then finally, I've got a quote here that says, "But what happens when the girl keeps living, when she ages proudly and defiantly without abandoning imagination or stories, or that secret wish to find magic wherever it hides? Well then, the poets would call her a witch." So there's quite a lot of conversation about, you know, how aging is seen as a negative thing in society, but actually there is a beauty in aging, and, you know, it's just some really lovely stuff in that first part. But then we get to part 2 and the romance plotline kicks in, and it is just so saccharinely sweet. It's very, very over the top. It feels like insta love, and I just didn't buy the chemistry between the two characters. It definitely felt like the author was hitting us over the head with their romance, you know, telling us how much they love each other, without really showing us them together and showing us that they work and that they have romance. Do you know what I mean? There's a difference between show and tell, and I feel like this was tell and not show, which isn't my favourite. So that was a bit disappointing. And also this is an adult book, but I personally felt like it read very young adult, in that the romance was very angsty, it was very over the top, it was very dramatic, and it didn't work for me. And I think it's such a shame, because I feel like the opening was quite refreshing, because it set up this main character who, you know, isn't actually really interested in romance and love. Like, that's not something that's particularly important to her. She would much prefer to go out and gallivant and run through the meadows and get her feet muddy and, you know, go out and enjoy and be a wild woman, you know? And I think that's really quite nice. And I'm frustrated because, I don't know, I feel like we have so many books where, you know, love and romance is the central thing and is the main thing that the woman wants. And it was quite nice to have an opening where we have a female main character who doesn't actually want that for herself, and actually, you know, would find meaning in becoming a honey witch and helping others and being in nature. But that all sort of changes after you get past part 1, and then suddenly she does want romance for herself, and that becomes the most pressing and important thing. And it's a shame, because that overshadows a lot of the lovely stuff that was in this book about grief and also about family and friendship, and those are some really beautiful elements that were talked about in this book, but it was just over saturated with this really over the top saccharine sweet romance for me. So yeah, that's such a shame, but never mind. Maybe if I knew that this was a romance, I would have gone in with slightly different expectations. I think that's part of the problem, so there might be a me thing, but yeah, don't let me put you off. You know, if you enjoy romance, you might get on with this one. And there were some lovely quotes. Okay, so the next book that I read or started to read was How to Become the Dark Lord and Die Trying by Django Rexler. So this is a comedy fantasy that I picked up because I saw a lot of buzz surrounding this online. A lot of people really enjoy this one. And I wanted something light and refreshing and something a bit different. And I really enjoy the premise for this story. So the idea is that in this book, we're following a main character who is stuck in a time loop. So she is a human woman, but she gets pulled to this fantasy world with the task of saving humanity. So she has to try and save everyone from the Dark Lord, and she has tried and tried and tried and always fails, and every time she dies she ends up resetting and back at the beginning again. And she's fed up. She's lived for thousands of years, she hasn't been successful, and so she decides to join the winning side for once. So she says to herself, do you know what, I can never seem to defeat the Dark Lord, so I am just going to become the Dark Lord myself, because then I have to win. And we basically follow her as she is trying to become this Dark Lord. And I read about 50% of this one, and then I did actually end up DNFing it because it didn't quite work for me. And I don't know if that's an unpopular opinion, because I have seen a lot of praise for this book. But for me, I just found the main character a little bit insufferable. It felt like her main personality trait was the fact that she has a really high sex drive and she's always thinking about the next lay. There wasn't really much more to her character. It was either that or she was just talking constantly about pop culture references, and she was cracking these jokes that the people around her don't get, because they're jokes about, human pop culture, and she's in a fantasy world. And I just didn't buy it, because she's supposed to have lived for thousands of years. She's supposed to not really remember what her life was like before she got stuck in the time loop. And yet she's able to constantly spew these pop culture references just for comedy value. And it annoyed me after a while. And I think it was going for that kind of Deadpool style. You know how in Deadpool, he breaks the fourth wall and he kind of makes jokes and comments to the audience. It's similar in this book, where she will kind of talk to you as the reader and things like that. And there were also sort of lots of footnotes and things, but to me it just felt a little bit try hard, and it wore off pretty quickly, and there wasn't enough in the plot to keep me hooked and engaged. So I just got bored after a while, to be honest with you. So that's such a shame, because it sounded like such a fun premise, but it just didn't work for me. Okay, so the next book that I finished was The Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson. So this is the third and final book in the Mistborn trilogy, and I listened to this one on audio with my husband, and it was a really fun time because it's done by Graphic Audio. So they include lots of sound effects and things, which makes for a really cinematic experience, which works really well for this kind of story, because Brandon Sanderson has a very kind of theatrical, cinematic writing style. So it really fit well, and I would definitely recommend the audiobook if you're looking for one. But yeah, I was pleased to finish this third and final book in the trilogy, and obviously I can't talk too much about the plot of this third book because that would be major spoilers. But the first book follows a rebellion plotline, and we're basically following a man called Kelsier, who is putting together a group of gifted individuals to try and overthrow the evil Lord Ruler. And the magic system in this world revolves around metals. So there are individuals who are able to eat and burn metals to harness their powers. And I love the magic system. I thought it made for a really creative and fun way to do combat. So the fight scenes and everything in these books are always really entertaining. And I'm the kind of person that normally glosses over fight scenes, but I do enjoy them in this series. And this final book was satisfying. Brandon Sanderson definitely ties up all of the threads in a nice neat bow. We get lots of reveals and things towards the end of this final book, and it kind of makes everything fit together nicely, like a nice puzzle. You kind of join all the dots and cross the T's with this final book. So it is satisfying in that way. My only criticism really is that Brandon Sanderson likes to give us lots of exposition. So at the beginning of each chapter, he will give us some information, some lore about the world, and it feels to me sometimes like he doesn't trust the reader to tie things together for themselves. He very much kind of over-explains things and makes it really clear that you understand everything that's happening. And I just feel like it's a bit of a shame. I think I prefer authors that leave a bit more to the reader, makes you have to think a bit harder for yourself maybe, and to not have all of the answers kind of given to you. So there is that. Also, the main villain in this third and final book did come across quite camp and quite over the top and a little bit silly, and I found it hard to take them too seriously because of that. They often had their villain speeches, they were very much kind of like a moustache twirling villain, and I don't know if it's in part because of the audio narrator, so the person who voiced the main villain in this third book had a very over the top way of presenting that character, very over the top voice. And that's a little bit of a shame because, like I say, it meant that I couldn't really take them as seriously as I should have done. So there was that. But anyway, all in all, I found this series to be really fun, really engaging. To be honest, I do think that I tend to prefer adult fantasy books that have a little bit more meat to them. So things that are a bit more theme driven, like I said before, and maybe have some more complex ideas that kind of stretch your mind and stretch your way of thinking. Whereas this one is more just a fun time. So if you're looking for a fun time, then I would recommend these books, and I would recommend graphic audio. The next book that I read was The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien, and I listened to this one on audiobook, which was narrated by Andy Serkis, who of course is the actor for Gollum, and he does such a fantastic job at narrating the story. You can tell that he pours his heart and soul into the performance, and it's just such a joy to listen to him telling the tale. So I very much enjoyed it, and I'm a big fan of The Lord of the Rings in general. I'm a big fan of the movies, and to be honest, I find it a bit difficult to distinguish between the book and the movies because the two are so merged in my mind. I think it doesn't help that Andy Serkis does the voices so accurately, so they sound like the characters in the movie. And you know, it's hard, isn't it? When I'm hearing some of the scenes, I'm just imagining it from the movie. They're so interconnected to me that it's hard for me to just think about the book alone, separate from the movies. But I really enjoyed it. I appreciate that Andy Serkis sings the songs and things in the book, because when I've read the book before, I've kind of glossed over the songs and the poems and things because you know, I'm not a big poem kind of person, but it was really nice actually hearing it. And there is actually important lore and world building within those songs and within those poems. So it was nice to actually pay a bit more attention this time and to pick up on those details. And, you know, I just appreciate this. It's obviously a famous story, so I don't feel like I need to talk to you too much about that. But we're basically following Frodo, who inherits this magic ring from Bilbo, and it's an incredibly dangerous ring, and he has to take it to Rivendell, which is an elven city, and then when he gets there, he ends up forming a fellowship. So there's 9 people who decide to escort Frodo. Well, there's 8 people, 9 including Frodo, who decide to go and take the ring to its destruction. So they want to destroy the ring so it can't get into the hands of the big bad Sauron. Tolkien really does well at describing environments and settings. You know, he's famous for spending a long time describing certain trees, but I just love that. I find it so comforting, and I also just find this story so nostalgic, I think because I grew up with the movies. It's very comforting to me, and I enjoyed watching Frodo begin his journey. I loved that we got to spend a bit more time in the Shire than you do in the movies, and you know, seeing the friendship between Frodo and the rest of the Fellowship. And it's just such an iconic start, isn't it? It's just a great quest story. I will say that it is a lot of travelling, and it's difficult, isn't it? I don't know if I would love the book as much as I do if I hadn't grown up with the movies, because there's not really a massive hook in this first book. You do just spend a lot of time on the road with the gang as they're traveling, but I just loved it. I just find it so comforting. I appreciate that the environment is kind of a character in itself, and we're finding out loads about the history and things just from traveling through the world. So you come across various ruins and things like that, and it all ties back to this mythology and this, you know, history that Tolkien has created, which is just so impressive. So anyway, I could prattle on for ages, but I have a reading vlog where I do that. So if you want to hear me talking more about this book, do check out my reading vlog, and let me know if you want me to do a reading vlog for the other 2 Lord of the Rings books, because I will if you want me to. Okay, and the final book that I wanted to talk to you about is Paladins Grace by T. Kingfisher. So this is a fantasy romance, and it follows our main character, who's a paladin called Stephen, and he is very much in a rut and not sure what to do with himself because his god actually died 3 years prior to the beginning of this book. And as a paladin, that is a devastating thing to happen because he has dedicated his whole life to this god. So he doesn't really know what to do with himself anymore. And he ends up meeting this woman called Grace, who is a perfumer. And the two of them actually witness this assassination attempt gone wrong. And they end up getting caught in this web of treachery. And there is also a murderer on the loose. There is a serial killer that is going around decapitating people. And yeah, so they're trying to figure out what's going on. There's definitely a mystery plotline at the heart of this story, as well as the romance, which I really appreciate. And, you know, this had a lot of things in it that I shouldn't have liked, that I normally don't like. So for example, you know, the ending wraps up a little bit quickly. It's a little bit insta-lovey, and, you know, the main love interest, the male love interest, is always described as being really big and being huge, and you know, that kind of thing normally annoys me in romance books, but I didn't mind in this story because I was just so entertained, and this is actually really funny. It's a funny, good time, and I just loved it. It didn't take itself too seriously. I really enjoyed all of the sort of nerdy references to D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, and I also liked the fact that it had enough plot outside of the romance to keep me hooked and to keep me reading through, you know, as well as having a good amount of spice and a good amount of chemistry between our two characters as well. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one. I raced through it. It's a really easy read, and I would recommend it to you if you're a fan of fantasy romance and if you want something that's fun and refreshing, because I definitely found it to be both of those things. So yeah, that brings me to the end of this wrap up. Those are all the books that I've read recently. Please let me know if you've read any of these books before and what you thought of them. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Either way, I'd love to hear from you. I hope that you are all doing really well wherever you are, whatever you're doing. And as always, don't forget to like this video if you did like it, subscribe if you want to see some more from me, and I guess I'll see you next time with another video. Bye.